A CIA agent was sent to London to recover a suitcase buried beneath an old railway station. The file said it once held something powerful enough to destroy both sides. When he opened it, there was nothing inside. No signs of theft, no broken lock. That's when he realized the truth had been taken long ago. And the empty suitcase wasn't a failure. It was a warning. Because the real danger wasn't what was buried underground, but who had been protecting the silence ever since. London North Station had not heard a train in over 40 years, yet on this particular morning it felt strangely awake. A thin November fog rolled in from the outskirts of North London, clinging to the iron bones of the abandoned platforms as if reluctant to let go. Rain had fallen through the night, leaving the air damp and metallic, the kind of cold that slipped quietly into coats and settled in the joints. The city beyond the station moved as usual. Buses groaned, traffic murmured, but here, time had chosen to rot instead of pass. Track 3 lay partially unearthed for scheduled structural inspection, its wooden sleepers swollen and darkened by decades of neglect. It was beneath this stretch of rail that a routine maintenance task stumbled into something the city had long tried to forget. The discovery came without drama. A maintenance worker named Sarah Whitmore, 48 years old, stopped mid-swing when her shovel struck something solid that did not sound like stone. Sarah was a woman shaped by practical life, medium height, broad-shouldered, with hands permanently roughened by work and weather. Her hair, once auburn, had faded to a utilitarian brown she kept tied back, and her face carried the calm detachment of someone who preferred things that could be fixed. She was known among her crew as dependable but distant, a woman who spoke little and trusted routine more than people. Years earlier, a fatal accident involving a collapsing scaffold had taken the life of her younger brother, an event that quietly carved caution into every movement she made. That morning, it was that same caution that made her stop instead of striking again. Brushing away mud with her boot, Sarah revealed the corner of a metal object buried deliberately beneath the track bed. It was not debris. It was not scrap. The surface was flat, angular, and unmistakably manufactured. She called over Tom Riley, the site supervisor, a man in his early 50s whose thick-set build and permanently furrowed brow made him look perpetually annoyed at the world. Tom crouched beside the object, wiped the grime away with a gloved hand, and frowned. It was a suitcase, not leather, not fabric, but solid metal, industrial, reinforced, its surface scarred with rust, yet strangely intact. The lock was still in place, unbroken. By protocol, the work stopped. The area was cordoned off within minutes. Local transport authorities were notified first, then quietly instructed to step back. Within the hour, London North Station, forgotten by the public, appeared on classified communication channels that had not been activated in decades. Somewhere far from the fog and rust, alarms did not sound, but screens did light up. An old file was retrieved from cold storage, its pages yellowed, its ink faded but legible. The header bore no agency name, only a numeric designation used jointly by NATO and intelligence services during the latter years of the Cold War. Under asset description, a single line stood out. Metal briefcase, contents classified, strategic impact, capable of burning both sides. No further explanation followed, no inventory list, no reference to what both sides meant, because at the time, everyone had known. By midday, unmarked vehicles arrived. Men and women stepped out wearing civilian coats that blended too well with the gray morning. Their movements were controlled, economical. No insignias were displayed. Sarah and her crew were asked, politely, firmly, to leave the site and sign non-disclosure forms they barely had time to read. Sarah complied without protest. As she walked away, she glanced back once at Track 3. The suitcase was being lifted carefully from the ground, as if it were something fragile rather than dangerous. She felt, without understanding why, that she was leaving behind a question she would never be allowed to ask. The suitcase was transferred to a temporary forensic enclosure erected within the station's old administrative wing. The room smelled of dust and stale paper, its windows boarded from the inside. Power cables snaked across the floor, humming softly. The suitcase sat alone on a steel table under harsh white light. Every angle was photographed, scanned, measured. The corrosion suggested long burial, yet the seal remained unbroken. No explosives, no tracking devices, no signs of tampering. That, in itself, unsettled the analysts watching from secure locations across different countries. The decision to open the suitcase was not made quickly. International protocols required consultation, verification, consensus. Secure calls crossed borders. Accents shifted. Old alliances resurfaced. The language was careful, bureaucratic, but beneath it lay a shared unease. Whatever had once been inside that case had been powerful enough to frighten people who no longer frightened easily. When authorization finally came, it arrived without ceremony. A technician wearing plain gloves disengaged the lock. There was no click of resistance, no final defiance. The lid lifted smoothly. The suitcase was empty. No documents, no microfilm, no storage devices, no false bottom. The interior lining showed age, but no sign of forced removal. It was clean in the way something becomes clean only after being left alone for a very long time. Silence filled the room, not the awkward kind, but the heavy, thoughtful silence of people realizing they were looking at the absence of something far more important than its presence. A second inspection followed, then a third. X-rays confirmed what eyes already knew. The suitcase had not been hollowed out recently. It had not been tampered with. It had been buried empty, or had been emptied long before burial. The analysts began to argue, quietly. Some called it a failure of intelligence. Others suspected a long-delayed misdirection. One phrase appeared repeatedly in internal notes: deliberate warning. The object had not been lost. It had been left behind, placed where it would eventually be found, but only after enough time had passed for memories to fade and records to decay. A deeper examination revealed a detail easily missed. On the inner steel frame, almost invisible beneath corrosion, faint markings appeared, shallow etchings worn down by time. They were not coordinates, not names, not codes that modern algorithms could crack. They were words, carved with intention but not emphasis, as if whoever had written them never expected them to be read quickly. Truth does not belong to nations. The sentence ended there. No signature, no date. That line was enough to trigger another level of response. Intelligence services did not fear missing information as much as they feared uncontrolled interpretation. The suitcase, empty and silent, had become a mirror. Each agency saw in it the version of history it most wanted to hide. By evening, London North Station was sealed again, this time officially condemned due to structural instability. The maintenance schedule was revised. Track 3 was reburied, though not in the same way. The suitcase was transported under armed escort to an undisclosed facility. Sarah Whitmore returned home with mud still under her nails and an unshakable sense that she had brushed against something that would outlive her. The fog thickened as night fell. From the outside, the station looked as it always had, dead, forgotten, irrelevant. But in secure rooms across the world, one conclusion had already been reached. The empty suitcase was not an end. It was the beginning of a question someone had wanted to survive longer than the answer. And whoever had placed it there had trusted time more than secrecy. Rain returned to London the way it always did, without apology. It slicked the pavements, softened the edges of the city, and turned streetlights into trembling halos. The briefing room at the American Embassy remained sealed and silent as the man assigned to the case stepped inside, carrying with him the weight of a question that had already begun to rot from the inside. Agent Jackson, Jack Cole, 35, did not look like a man who belonged to offices. He was tall, without being imposing, lean in the way of someone who trusted precision over force. His dark hair was kept deliberately unremarkable, his face sharp enough to be memorable only if you were trained to remember faces. Years in the field had taught him how to disappear in plain sight. The tailored suit he wore was immaculate but conservative, a uniform chosen not for vanity but for control. Jack's calm demeanor had been shaped by failure, specifically a mission in Berlin years earlier that had gone catastrophically wrong. He rarely spoke about it, but the restraint in his voice and the vigilance in his eyes were permanent reminders of a man who had learned that confidence was useless without caution. The CIA had not summoned Jack to London for explanations. It had sent him because unanswered questions made people nervous, and Jack Cole was good at making nervous questions talk. The empty suitcase recovered at London North Station had already crossed from anomaly to threat. Jack reviewed the recovered Cold War file again, this time focusing not on what it claimed the suitcase contained, but on who had last signed off on it. Names were missing, others were redacted. One detail, however, stood out. A Soviet-era code name referenced in the margins, faint but consistent. The Wraith. The name did not surprise him. It tightened something behind his ribs. MI6 insisted on a liaison. That was how Jack met Dr. Anya Sharma, 42, in a quiet conference room overlooking the Thames. Anya was not what Jack expected from a field-adjacent intelligence analyst. She was of average height, slender but not fragile, with dark hair pulled back in a practical knot and eyes that missed nothing. Her posture suggested discipline rather than intimidation, and her voice was calm, precise, with an undertone of dry humor that surfaced only when she trusted the room. Before intelligence work, she had been a forensic archaeologist, trained to reconstruct history from fragments most people ignored. The death of her husband in a bombing incident in Delhi years earlier had drawn her into intelligence analysis, not out of vengeance, but out of a need to understand how hidden systems failed. Anya believed knowledge was only dangerous when mishandled, a philosophy that made her invaluable and occasionally difficult. They did not waste time with pleasantries. Sterling's real name was Marcus Sterling, age 61, presumed dead since 1997. Former KGB, later freelance intelligence broker when the Soviet Union collapsed, known for disappearing just before operations failed. His code name, the Wraith, had been earned honestly. Anya laid photographs across the table, grainy surveillance stills, old passport images, blurred reflections caught in windows. Sterling's face had aged badly, once handsome, now hollowed, with deep lines carved by paranoia rather than time. Jack recognized him instantly. Berlin. A failed extraction. A contact executed because Sterling had vanished with critical information. Jack had survived. Others hadn't. If Sterling was involved with the suitcase, Anya said, then it was never meant to be delivered. Jack nodded. He never finished jobs. He curated them. Their investigation moved quickly through archived transit records, safehouse registries, and forgotten logistics chains that converged repeatedly on London North Station during the late 80s. The station had been neutral ground, a place where handoffs occurred without allegiance. Sterling's name appeared nearby, but never directly attached. That was his style. By the third day, Jack felt it. The familiar sensation of attention pressing against his spine. Surveillance had become part of his muscle memory, but this was different. Too patient, too close. He adjusted his routine subtly, altered routes, used reflections and timing. Someone was watching him, and they were skilled. That, in itself, was not unusual. What unsettled him was where the trail led when he followed it backward. Encrypted pings appeared on his secure device, not directed at him, but bouncing through channels he recognized too well. Langley protocols, CIA internal traffic. Someone inside his own agency was monitoring the investigation, not officially, not transparently. Anya confirmed it from her side. The encryption was American, high level. The implication settled between them without words. "There's a mole," she said quietly. "High enough to see everything," Jack replied. They continued the Sterling Trail anyway. A derelict safe house surfaced in Kent, long abandoned but still registered in outdated NATO ledgers. The location was too obvious to be active, which made it useful. Sterling favored places people stopped checking. That night, Jack barely slept. Memories of Berlin returned uninvited, the sound of gunfire echoing through narrow streets, the look on Sterling's face as he melted into shadow. Jack had learned then that the most dangerous enemy was not the one who attacked, but the one who withdrew at the right moment. The next morning, as Jack exited his hotel, a stray dog lingered near the entrance. It was old, gray around the muzzle, one ear torn slightly at the tip. It watched him with alert, intelligent eyes. Jack paused, then moved on. A small thing, insignificant, but it stayed with him. Animals noticed patterns before humans did. Later that afternoon, confirmation arrived. A secure terminal at Langley had been accessing archived Sterling files under a legacy clearance code that should have been inactive. The access logs led nowhere specific, only upward. Someone powerful was shaping the investigation from afar. The suitcase had been empty, but the shadows around it were not. Jack understood now. This was no longer about what had been taken from the case. It was about who had been protecting the absence for decades, and why. Kent did not announce itself. The city loosened its grip gradually, brick and traffic dissolving into narrow roads edged with hedgerows stripped bare by winter. The sky hung low and uniform, a dull sheet of gray that pressed the countryside into silence. The safe house lay beyond a gravel lane that curved just enough to avoid curiosity. Its presence so ordinary, it felt intentional. No signs, no recent tracks, no invitation. Jackson slowed before the final turn. Anya said nothing. Both understood that places like this were not chosen to hide secrets forever, only long enough for people to stop looking. The house accepted them reluctantly. The door resisted, then yielded with a dry sound that echoed too loudly in the stillness. Inside, air that had not moved in years clung to the lungs. Nothing was broken, nothing was personal. Furniture remained, positioned for use, but never comfort. Whoever had last stood here had left without urgency, confident the house would do the rest. Jackson moved through the rooms without speaking, checking corners, listening to the building more than watching it. Anya traced the periphery, attention drawn to absence rather than presence. There were no photographs, no papers, no dust patterns suggesting frequent return. That alone narrowed the timeline. The pantry wall revealed itself only if pressed in the right place. The mechanism was crude, reliable, the kind of solution chosen by someone who trusted simplicity over elegance. The stairs descended into a low-ceilinged basement where damp had softened the edges of everything it touched. A single light flickered on, revealing a metal desk bolted to the floor. On its surface sat two objects, placed deliberately and untouched by decay, a leather-bound journal and a compact mechanical cipher device. The arrangement was not careless, it was ceremonial. Jackson did not need to say the name aloud. Anya already knew. They approached without haste. The journal opened easily, pages stiff but intact. The writing inside was controlled and sparse. No narrative, no explanations. Dates, numbers, locations, transfers, entire years reduced to entries that marked movement rather than meaning. Anya read through several pages before speaking, her voice low. The journal made no reference to the suitcase itself. Instead, it documented the life of what had once been inside it. Information extracted, sold and resold through a lattice of accounts that spanned borders and administrations. The same source appeared repeatedly, never identified, only elevated through title and clearance. The language was consistent. The implication was not. "This wasn't theft," Anya said. "It was supply." Jackson studied the cipher device. It was old, heavy, resistant to anything modern. A tool chosen by someone who understood that the safest system was the one no one bothered to update. He had seen this before, not in form, but in philosophy. Sterling had never believed in permanence. He believed in leverage. The documents in the suitcase had not been kept because they were valuable. They had been distributed because they were dangerous. The ledger confirmed what the empty case could not. The materials had existed, and long enough to change hands many times, which meant someone had ensured their survival, access, and eventual disappearance. The emptiness was not an erasure. It was the final stage of use. They worked methodically, capturing what mattered, reconstructing the structure of transactions rather than their contents. Outside, rain resumed, steady and patient, blurring the world above them. In a crate beneath the desk, Anya found objects Sterling had not bothered to reclaim. None of them explained anything. All of them suggested exhaustion rather than sentiment. Jackson recognized the pattern. People who lived like this did not believe in legacy. They believed in exit strategies. They were preparing to leave when Jackson's phone vibrated once. No alert tone, no signal. He answered without greeting. The voice that came through was distorted beyond recognition, its cadence flattened into something procedural. "You're following residue. The source is upstream. Transaction code K974 Delta." The call ended without waiting. Anya looked up from the desk. Jackson repeated the code. She froze, then reached for her tablet, already isolating channels. The format was not commercial, not criminal. It belonged to a classification tier few people ever saw directly. Emergency reallocations. Exceptional authority. The kind of mechanism designed to bypass accountability in the name of urgency. They left the house as they had found it. No signs of intrusion, no changes. On the drive back, the road unspooled in silence. Anya worked the code through systems that avoided standard oversight, constructing the picture indirectly. The result was fragmented but unmistakable. A chain of approvals stretched back years, each justified, each legal, each dissolving upward into committees, delegated powers, and executive silence. No single decision point, no individual signature. Responsibility diffused until it became untouchable. They stopped briefly outside a service station. An old dog lay near the entrance, unmoving except for its eyes. It watched them without expectation, as if accustomed to people passing through without staying. Anya left a bowl of water. The dog drank, then settled again, content to remain where it was. Jackson noted the stillness. Some creatures learned early that survival depended on observation, not intervention. Back in London, the river reflected the city in fractured lines of light. The case had shifted shape. The suitcase no longer mattered. Neither did Sterling, not on his own. The manipulation was older, deeper, embedded in procedure rather than malice. Someone with authority had decided long ago that certain truths were liabilities best managed quietly, slowly, until time itself became a shield. Jackson understood then that the investigation had been guided from its first step. Not blocked, not stopped, allowed. Just enough progress to keep it contained. The realization settled without panic. Berlin had taught him what chaos felt like. This was something colder, more deliberate. He closed his phone and looked at Anya. This was never about what was buried. She nodded. It was about who made sure it stayed useful. Outside, rain erased footprints as fast as they could be made. Somewhere within the system, someone had just learned that the pattern had been seen. And from that moment on, the investigation could no longer pretend it was accidental. London after dark had a way of disguising intention. Rain polished the streets into mirrors, turning headlights into elongated ghosts and alleyways into deliberate choices. The transaction code from Kent did not lead to a document or a confession. It led to a number, quiet, stable, and insulated by jurisdictions designed to forget questions. Jackson traced it without touching official channels, following the kind of financial shadow that only existed because powerful people agreed it should. The account sat in Switzerland, layered through trusts and intermediaries, dormant for long stretches, then suddenly active during moments of political tension. The beneficiary name surfaced only after pressure was applied from the side, not the front. Eleanor Vance. The realization arrived without shock. It settled instead, like a final piece sliding into a space that had always been waiting for it. Vance had been present in the margins of the case from the beginning, approving, redirecting, cautioning patience. Authority had been her camouflage. Jackson understood then why the investigation had been allowed to continue at all. It had never been meant to succeed, only to remain believable. Anya confirmed it independently, her voice steady when she delivered the conclusion. She had cross-referenced the account's activity with travel manifests and found a convergence scheduled for that same evening. A private art museum in central London, invitation only, closed to the public, operating under the protection of donors who believed culture was best appreciated without witnesses. Sterling would be there. So would Vance. The museum occupied a renovated 19th-century building tucked behind a narrow square, its stone facade deliberately understated. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and old canvas. Security was discreet rather than aggressive, designed to reassure patrons rather than challenge them. Anya moved through the space as if she belonged, blending into the rhythm of donors and curators. Jackson remained at the perimeter, letting the room reveal itself. This was not a place for confrontations. It was a place for agreements. Vance arrived without escort. She wore authority the way some people wore jewelry. Subtle, unmistakable. Chosen rather than inherited. Her posture was relaxed, her expression composed, the confidence of someone accustomed to rooms adjusting around her. She did not scan for threats. She scanned for relevance. Sterling appeared minutes later, thinner than his photograph suggested, his movements economical, eyes restless. Time had not softened him. It had compressed him. They met beneath a large abstract piece that pretended not to depict anything at all. Their conversation was brief, no pleasantries, no warmth. Jackson caught fragments as he drew closer, logistics, timing, containment. This was not negotiation. It was maintenance. He stepped into view deliberately. Anya followed a moment later, positioning herself not as backup, but as witness. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Vance looked at Jackson with something close to disappointment, as if he had missed a simpler solution. "This wasn't how it was meant to end," she said calmly. "It hasn't ended," Jackson replied. "You just stopped controlling it." Sterling shifted, calculating exits. Vance did not. She spoke with the certainty of someone who believed explanation was still power. She did not deny it. She outlined it. Years ago, she had accessed the documents contained in the suitcase, proof of corruption, manipulation, and complicity on all sides. Releasing them would have destabilized alliances beyond repair. Burying them would not have been enough. So she repurposed them, leveraged Sterling, monetized silence. When the risk of exposure grew too high, she emptied the suitcase and ordered it buried again, not as concealment, but as deterrence. Let it be found. Let it be empty. Let curiosity exhaust itself against absence. "You don't burn down a house to remove termites," she said. "You reinforce the beams." Jackson listened without interrupting. The logic was familiar. The justification was not. Before he could respond, Sterling moved. The moment fractured. A sculpture shattered. Security shouted. Someone fired. Jackson lost sight of Sterling as bodies scattered and alarms finally sounded. Vance did not run. She stood where she was, hands visible, expression unchanged. MI6 arrived before local police, summoned by Anya with a call she had prepared long before this moment. Vance was taken without resistance, her composure intact, her eyes already distant, as if she were calculating appeals rather than consequences. Sterling vanished into the city, leaving behind nothing but confirmation. Outside, rain intensified, erasing the chaos almost as quickly as it had formed. The museum doors closed. Statements would be written. Jurisdictions would argue. But the shape of the truth had changed. Jackson stood under the awning, rain soaking through his coat, watching lights reflect on the pavement. The suitcase had been empty by design. The warning had worked until it hadn't. The second station did not pretend to be forgotten. It still breathed, still functioned, but only just. Trains arrived and departed with mechanical indifference, carrying commuters who had learned to look through one another. Night pressed low over the platforms, the air sharp with cold and the faint tang of oil and electricity. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flattening color and emotion alike. This was the kind of place where endings could pass unnoticed, where a man could step onto a train and vanish without ceremony. Jackson moved through the crowd with deliberate restraint, not hunting so much as allowing himself to be found. He had learned that pursuit often revealed more about the pursued than speed ever could. Sterling stood near the far end of the platform, partially shielded by a column scarred with decades of use. He did not look like a man running anymore. His posture suggested calculation had given way to inevitability. When Jackson closed the distance, Sterling turned before a word was spoken, as if the decision to face him had already been made. There was no weapon in his hands, no reach toward one, only a tired stillness that felt earned. They spoke quietly, the noise of the station swallowing anything that might have sounded like confession. Sterling did not deny what had happened at the museum. He did not justify it either. He spoke instead of time, of how long it took for ideals to become habits, for habits to become mechanisms, and for mechanisms to begin feeding on themselves. The documents, he said, had never been safe inside a suitcase. They had been safe only while they were in motion, so he had copied them, fragmented them, dispersed them across layers of storage designed not to hide, but to endure. The final access key had been built around a logic only Jackson would recognize, a contingency born from an old failure that neither of them had ever forgotten. There was never going to be a clean end, Sterling said, only a quieter one. Jackson listened. He did not interrupt. When Sterling finished, he nodded once. That was enough. Sterling stepped back from the edge of the platform, hands visible, shoulders slackening as if a long-held tension had finally been released. When security arrived, summoned without drama, Sterling did not resist. He looked relieved, in the way men did when the future no longer required their participation. The data came exactly as promised. Jackson accessed it alone, following a trail that unfolded not through brute force, but recognition, patterns embedded in phrasing, timing, omissions. The archive revealed itself slowly, deliberately, as if testing intent. It contained what the suitcase once had, and more: records, corroborations, transactions that mapped a network of complicity with clinical precision. It did not sensationalize, it did not accuse, it documented. And in doing so, it dismantled what had been carefully diffused for decades. The consequences were swift but quiet. Investigations unfolded behind closed doors. Committees dissolved. Clearances were revoked. The network did not collapse publicly. It unraveled administratively, thread by thread, until there was nothing left to protect. The absence that had once been weaponized was replaced by an accountability that did not seek attention. It did not need it. Jackson was summoned weeks later to a room with no windows and no insignia. The ceremony was brief, almost perfunctory. Words were spoken that acknowledged service without naming specifics. Hands were shaken. A decision was formalized. Recognition was given without spectacle. It was the kind of honor meant to close a chapter, not open one. Jackson accepted it without comment. He understood what it represented: an ending. When he stepped outside, London greeted him with a rare clarity. The river moved steadily, unbothered by history or intention. Jackson walked along the Thames until the city softened into reflection. Anya waited at a small cafe near the water, seated where she could watch both the river and the street. She looked up when he approached and smiled, not with relief, but with recognition. They spoke of ordinary things first: weather, coffee, time. Only later did they allow the silence to stretch into meaning. Jackson told her he had requested extended leave. Not retirement, not escape. Space. Anya did not ask how long. She understood that some distances were measured internally. They walked together along the riverbank, the city receding into something almost gentle. There were no plans made aloud, no promises framed as guarantees. Only an agreement to let the future arrive without being intercepted. Behind them, the stations continued to operate, empty suitcases forgotten beneath layers of bureaucracy and soil. Ahead of them, the river carried light toward the dark, indifferent to what it erased and what it preserved. For the first time in a long while, Jackson felt no need to follow, to decode, or to intervene. The warning had been understood. The evidence had spoken, and the silence that followed was not absence, but peace.